All right, good day. Steve Anderson here. Welcome to our Crown Council webinar today entitled Not Another Team Meeting. Uh, you're in listen only mode. You should have the control panel on your screen. You're welcome to uh, enter questions in your control panel and submit them at any time. We'll address those questions later on in the webinar as we get started talking about our topic today. So Aaron Gannier, who is a practice advisor with us at the Total Patient Service Institute, is our webinar leader today. Aaron has been in dental practice management for over 15 years, has led a very successful multi-million-dollar dental team himself, and now as part of the Total Patient Service Practice Advisor team, he's in offices nearly every day of the week implementing top skills and systems, which is one of those skills is how to have effective meetings, which we're going to talk about today. One of the questions that we get a lot and objections that we get a lot from teams is, well, we don't have time to meet because it takes away from patient care time. What we've observed over the years is that effective team meetings yield a 3 times return on the time spent. In other words, designed properly, you should get a 3-hour return in terms of production for every hour that you spend in a team meeting if it's done correctly. And so we're going to talk about today how to leverage that time that you spend together, the essential time spent together as a team, creating more productivity and working on the practice instead of just in it when you see patients every day, and what you can do to make your team meetings even more successful and more productive. So with that, Aaron, thanks for being our webinar leader today.
Thanks, Steve, and it's great to be with you, Crowns. I'm excited to share a lot of great information with you, and I'm going to move to our first slide here. And we basically have 9 areas of discussion that we're going to be talking about. This is one of my only slides here that I have something listed out, but these are the 9 areas that we're going to discuss. Towards the end, we're going to talk about some great things that we can do within our practices to get results, but I thought it important to be able to identify some of those things that leave us with negative tastes in our mouth about meetings, or leave us with not wanting to go to meetings, or making it where we want to cancel the meeting. So you can see these 9 discussion areas. Number 1 is the top meeting killers, and there's a few of them. When do we cancel a meeting? Should we cancel a meeting? What are those things that would cause that to happen? Number 3, stop making these mistakes. We'll talk about some mistakes that are constantly made. And then the next one is the proven framework for effective meetings. Number 5 is to supercharge your opportunities. What can we do to make sure that we maximize our meeting time? And then you've got some secrets that we're going to cover to energize your meeting, to make them fun and exciting, and have involvement by other team members. The next one is, we talk about the same things over and over again, but nothing ever changes. Well, never again. We're going to lay out some things to be able to make sure that we can keep on track, make sure that we help us be accountable to each other and as a team. And then number 8 is obviously right there, ready to use resources. I don't want to give you too many. I want you to master just a few, so I have about 2 or 3 resources that you can use. We'll make those available after the webinar, so you can download those as a PDF to be able to use in your practice starting today if you need to. And then the last area of discussion is going to be making meetings equal increased production, and that's going to be my favorite part right there, and Steve's going to help me interject on some things to make sure that we can use this time of a meeting to make sure that we have increased production. Because just like what Steve was saying, sometimes we get afraid of carving out time for a meeting during patient production time. So with that said, let's move towards it. You can see that great little comic up in the right corner. I found that. I thought that was great. So we don't want anybody to be bored. So I have about 26 slides that we're going to go through here in the next maybe 35, 40 minutes or so. So we'll be moving pretty quickly. Let's go to that first slide. So top meeting killers, everybody. I'm sure some of you can think of some of them. But the first one, just gonna make the invisible visible right away and point it out. The top meeting killer is you. It's me. It's myself. It's I. It's all about you and your attitude and how you come to the meeting. Are you coming prepared in mind, body, and spirit? Are you coming just because you have to? Do you look like this girl on the screen where our eyes are rolling? Are we not wanting to go to the meeting? Do we not like to go because we don't ever participate? Think about yourself and how you engage, because that's going to be a theme throughout today's webinar, is engaging and making a difference. Okay, so let's move to the next slide here. Some of the top killers would be the time of day. Now, I like this picture because what I see is in many practices across the country and in practices that I have worked in, we seem to throw the meetings at the most inopportune time of our energy level. And it's at a time when we've maybe worked already half a day. We're on the tired side. We're hungry. We haven't really had any recharge time, and we've just been doing great production and great work, and so we're a little time. For many of us, that's the worst time to throw a meeting at us. So I want to make sure that we identify the right times for team meetings, and I'm going to speak about that a little bit later. But you got to make sure that you know how much can you retain when you're in that meeting. And if you don't have energy, maybe a meeting's not the best thing to have. Maybe we need to do some other things before we have those meetings. So just like Steve was saying, it's okay to have a meeting during a productive time. It doesn't have to be on a Saturday or a Friday when we're closed, but identifying a time, it might be on a Tuesday at 10 o'clock when it's hard to fill. Maybe we identify that time as an effective meeting time. So we'll talk about a little bit more about that later, but it can be a meeting killer if the time of day isn't right. Time. There's so many things that I've read. How long is a meeting? How long should we have? How short should it be? What's just right? Well, for many of you, you'll discover that for yourselves, but from things that I've looked into and read, in fact, Steve and I were just speaking of this, and Steve, you can jump in here about the correct amount of time for a meeting. So Steve, can you bring us up to speed on what you've also read on effective lengths of meeting times?
So one of the rules of thumb is, and this comes from Peter Drucker, who's one of the most recognized management experts of the last century. And his recommendation is that the most productive segment of time is 90 minutes. So if you can block out 90 minutes of uninterrupted time, that is an ideal time period to have meaningful discussion and action planning, and that unless it is a training session or learning experience, that after 90 minutes you may tend to get diminishing returns. So that would not apply to a team retreat or an annual planning session, but in general, just a typical team planning meeting, 90 minutes is the ideal segment of time.
Great. So think about your schedule as you identify those times. What 90-minute block of time could you possibly have? So if you figure if you have a great meeting for 90 minutes and then you prepare your day or get ready, that last half hour as a possibility to start seeing your patients, maybe that'll work in your practice. But try to focus on that 90 minutes. It's just enough time to be able to open up dialogue, to identify opportunities, to figure out ways to improve or make better those opportunities. Sometimes you got to have time, homework time, right then and there to be able to do it. What I don't want you to do is to is to have a meeting just to have a meeting, just to have a discussion, and then have no time to be able to actually do some of the things that we're talking about. So again, we'll get into a little bit more of that in the webinar here. Here's some fun facts about what you see on the screen now. Many of us have these smartphones, and it used to be a major thing with smartphones. Well, now what's within those smartphones? Well, all of these apps. And what's funny about these apps is they're all connected to us. They all allow us to push information to each other or push information to us, whether it's a news feed, whether it's a Twitter, Facebook, whether the weather alerts, whether it's a text message. Things are being pushed to our phone constantly. In fact, our own Greg Anderson here at the Crown Council was sharing a great fact with Steve and I earlier about a statistic that he read where they've done research. The average person gets something pushed to their phone, like I was saying, whether it's one of those apps or an email or tweet or a text, once every 6 minutes. That's about 150 times a day for the average person. Some may be more, as we know, and some may be less, as we may know. But think about it. If you have a 90-minute meeting, 60-minute meeting, 30-minute meeting, you do the math. How many things are being pushed to us? It's really hard to look away or not be part of that phone or that conversation or that news feed. So one thing that we say is create something in your practice where it's not a distraction. So some of you have heard Steve's solution. So Steve, can you share one of your solutions about cell phones and meetings?
So turning the cell phone on to vibrate is not sufficient. So the recommendation is to create a cell phone parking lot in the office, and that would be a place outside of patient care area where cell phones can be literally parked, stored, put away, if you will, so that they're not a distraction. They can be checked on break time, but this would apply to during meeting time, that the cell phones get put in the parking lot outside of the meeting room so that everybody can stay focused on the task at hand. So don't just put them on vibrate or silence, put them in the parking lot.
And just to shout out to some of those teams out there, I won't name you by name, but I know there are several of you out there that I have been in your practices and I have been a witness to these cell phone parking lots. And they do work, but they are a constant reminder to us of our commitment to making sure that we're focused on our job at hand and that we are not distracted. So this next slide, before I click it over, I saved it for the last because I think it's our biggest competitor, and I bet you many of you are knowing what it's going to be. So let's click over, and it's about that time. It's about lunchtime right now as we speak for many of us across the country. But one of our top competitors, if not the top competitor, is food. And let me tell you, food does not like to lose at all. And when it's in the mix, I promise you, 100% of the time, it will win. Look back to the several last meetings that you've had over the months. If food was involved, how much quality time during that, let's say, 90-minute block, 60-minute block, how much quality time was spent eating that delicious hot food, sweet, savory, something really good that you absolutely love, enjoying it, savoring it, versus how much time or quality time was spent dedicated to the meeting? Well, if you're like me, I've been involved in meetings in the past where we have a short 60 minutes, we get food. What happens? The food shows up 10 minutes late. And then we all dive in. Someone's finishing up with a patient. We start to eat. We start to play. We start to talk. Before you know it, the food and all that time spent enjoying each other, which there's nothing wrong with enjoying each other, is lost. The first 30 minutes, 20 minutes of the meeting is lost to food. So I'm not saying don't eat, but if you do have food, dedicate time to food and enjoy that food, and then have a cutoff time where you can push it to the side and focus on the task at hand. Some of the resources and some of the things that I'm going to be sharing with you is going to require participation. Having a slice of pizza in your hand is not the type of participation that I'm talking about and will be a distraction. So moving on to the second part of the 9 areas of discussion is canceling the meeting. What? Why would you cancel a meeting? Well, I chose this picture as I was looking through pictures because I thought, you know what, how true is it? Our children. I've got, an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I love kids, and when they get around parties or when they get around balloons, when they get around a distraction, they are easily distracted. And there's nothing wrong with that because right now it's party time. Right now it's playtime. So my suggestion to canceling a meeting is when we have a celebration for a team member, whether it be their birthday party or whether it be an anniversary date of when they started at the practice, it is important that we focus on that team member at that time for that 30, 60 minutes, whatever time you set aside, and enjoy the moment because they don't come very often. Make sure that we enjoy those team members. So think of it like this. In fact, I'll even direct this at you, Steve, because I know you've got 6 girls at home. When was the last time, or can you think of a time where you threw a party for one of your daughters? You had friends come over, you had cake delivered, you had everything set up, you've had balloons in the party, and right once the party starts, you pull out your binder and you say, okay, everybody, I've got an announcement. I'd like to discuss the chore chart. I want to talk about the assignments, and I want to talk about how we need to be more responsible at doing our jobs.
Yeah, I did that once, Aaron, and then they quit inviting me to the parties.
Yeah, I can
Obviously,
only imagine.
those two things don't mix very well.
They don't mix well, but it's sadly we've all been caught in that where we try to do a meeting with an appreciation. And so right now, I'm drawing the line in the sand. Have those times, and however much time you spend with that appreciation, dedicate that time, and then also dedicate your meeting time so that we can focus on the task at hand because I'll say this, and I've said this to many of us, doctors, you're nothing without your team, and team, you're nothing without your doctors. And so use those great times to appreciate each other and don't have a meeting during it. Um, Second thing is how do you show up at the meeting? If you have a meeting blocked out every other week, once a month, and there has been no preparation time, how does it make sense to show up at the race like you see this picture in high heels, or as Pam Peterson would say, in pumps and a skirt and a blouse to start a race? You wouldn't. You'd show up in your racing gear, your shoes, your shorts. You'd be comfortable. You'd be engaged. Not only that, look at the photo where they're going in different directions. When we are not prepared, when we don't show up to the meeting prepared, with nothing in hand, with no topics of discussion, maybe you need to rethink about, do we need to have this meeting? Don't have meetings just to have meetings. Make sure that they are structured and ordered so that you can maximize that productive time, which most of you are doing meetings during productive time. So if that's the case, make sure that you have an agenda. We're going to talk about that a little bit later towards those resources at the end, but don't go in different directions. Have a plan and come to the race and the meeting ready to go. This one right here is moving on to the third part of the areas of discussion. I found these and thought they were very, very good as far as the characteristics, if you will, of negative meetings. What are some of those things out there? Well, we all know, as you guys are looking at that screen, look at those percentages. First thing I want to point out is every single one of them is above 50%, more than half of those that were surveyed of the negative things of meetings, which would be drifting off of subject. Now, that one right there, it's far and away the highest. And you know what? I've been in many teams and we enjoy each other and it's easy to get off a subject. It's easy to talk about patience and stories and things of that nature. But if it goes too far and it drifts off of subject, it can have a negative impact and slow us down from what we need to do, which is following some sort of agenda. Again, poor preparation, you can see those right there. Questionable effectiveness. I don't know how many times I myself have thought, is this even effective to be doing what we're doing? Because I feel like we're going nowhere. So if it's thought of by nearly 3/4 of people, that's a good question to ask yourself, doctors and team leaders, when you are making an agenda. What are we doing in our agenda, and is it set to be effective? Okay. Um, Moving on, lack of listening, empty words of participants, meaning I'll do it, I'll do it, I'll do it, but nothing ever happens, or we talk about it, talk about it, talk about it, and nothing happens. And then obviously the length, which we talked about, and then right there, staring us in the face is lack of participation. That's a big one, and everybody knows the feeling when nobody speaks up, and we're just focusing on something that might not have much important to us at the time. Let's move to the fourth area, which is proven framework for effective meetings. So as you look at the picture, I want you to think, and I'm going to talk to doctors right now, or to those team members who have helped their doctors build a practice from scratch, which I have done a few times myself. So think about your practices when you first started getting into them, all the blood, sweat, and tears, the prayers, the hard work, everything that you gave that practice to build it, to choose the location, to pick the equipment. There was a lot of work, framework that went into your practice to get it where it is today, if I'm not mistaken. So think about it. This picture, he's on his hands and his knees, and he's working hard to create whatever he's building. And so I want to challenge you. I guess this would be my first challenge, is for you to get back down on your hands and knees as team leaders, and to create a framework for making your team and yourselves accountable to having effective meetings, more effective meetings. I mean, think about it. Once you have the foundation set or the framework set, and it's easy and repeatable and you can stick to it, your meetings will be much more effective because you've laid that groundwork. So we're going to talk about some of those things. I'm even going to give you some examples on how to have that effective a team meeting, and create a great framework. So you can all see we know Benjamin Franklin. I'm sure many of us would love to have some of those right now, but there's a watch laid over that photo, as you can see. And when I was doing some research, I was reminded of a quote that I've used for years, but I didn't actually know who said it. So I did some searching and found several different sources so that I knew it was most likely of him. But he has a saying, and many of you have heard this, but here's the saying. Benjamin Franklin was quoted by saying, "If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail." I'm going to say that again. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Now, I've used that for years, and I was actually excited when I saw that it's been around a long time. In fact, it was one of the founding fathers of this great country. But think about it. Coming back to planning for our meetings. If we don't plan, how do we know how successful we can be? Versus if we plan, we can at least see some framework of the fruits of what we want to accomplish. So think about that, and don't ever forget that. Write that down. That's a great thing to have. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. So, proven framework, an agenda. You guys, I know it might sound elementary to actually pull up the Word document and type out an agenda, but think about it. Having an agenda is something that guides us, it leads us, it keeps us on track, it helps us to stay in the game, if you will. It helps us to know the plays or what's next. Remember, an agenda is not necessarily a laundry list of things, but an agenda is something where there is defined purpose for the meetings, where we have developed something that is simple, something that is repeatable, and something that creates a habit. If you think about us as human beings, we are creatures of habit. And if we laid the framework for a great agenda that we use constantly, other team members can join in and be part of that agenda. One thing I do recommend is plan it in advance and distribute the agenda prior to the meeting. It could be that morning, it could be the day before, but let them know what the few things that we're going to talk about in our meeting. There's nothing wrong with that. Also, the last part of the agenda, inform team members of any necessary preparation. We'll discuss that a little bit later, but think about if we're going to enjoy each other as a team, there's got to be some participation among the team so that we can learn from each other and be a part of each other. So let's move on to 5, supercharge your opportunities. We're all good at pointing out opportunities, and I use those words very carefully. We're good at pointing out opportunities. I've been in teams and I've seen it. I've done it. Pointing out opportunities. Well, if you're good at pointing out opportunities, then you are good enough to write down that opportunity so that we can work together as a team to make it better. So let me give you an example. For me and myself, when I used to have a meeting in an office that I worked at every other week, and many times it would come time for that meeting and we didn't have very many things, but yet there were so many things throughout that 2-week period that we had discussed, that we talked about, that we said, let's bring that up in our meeting, let's bring that up in our meeting, let's bring that up in our meeting. And then meeting time comes and doctor looks around and says, okay, what are some things that we need to discuss or hash out or make better? And we all look like, well, I don't know, because it was so much time ago. So here's a resource, a simple resource. I call it the MAC, the Messages, Actions, and Communications. As we work through our days, write down items to discuss in our team meetings. You can see right there, opportunities, reminders, training, review, systems, ideas, and team discussions. Then you have the date of when you did it, because it's nice to know, was that 2 weeks ago that I wrote that down? I can't even remember that. And then you put your initials. Why would I put the initials? The initials is what helps us. If we're good enough to point something out, then we're good enough to talk about it as a team to identify ways that we can make it better and not be afraid of saying, hey, let's talk about this. Let's improve this because it keeps happening. And if we don't change it, it'll never change. So what I've done and seen with other teams is they'll print this out. And again, I'll make this available at the end in a PDF. Simply print it out. You can laminate it and you can use a marker on it so that you can reuse it every week and you can write those things on there. Or if you want, you can print it out and you can store it in a meeting binder so that you can always have those things. From this, you're going to be able to pull 1, 2, 3, a few things to be able to add to your agenda so that you can have things in your agenda. Because think about it, you guys, many of those agenda items will come from things that you have added on this form. But that doesn't mean that you have to talk about everything on this form at that team meeting. You can spread it out. Identify the things for the agenda that you need to discuss at that time. But this is a good place to jot down those thoughts so that you don't forget. Let's move to number 6 in the area. So 5 secrets to energize your team. I'm going to come back to the time of day. You guys, I have seen many meetings right after lunch. And we all know that we get tired, we get lethargic, and we're kind of checked out because we've worked half a day. So if it was my way, I would say having a meeting at a time where it's either less productive or first thing in the morning. I've seen many teams out there who have their meetings first thing in the morning, you know, Tuesday morning from 8 to 9, and the first patient's coming at 9 or what have you, where they can accomplish so much. We're freshest in the morning for most of us. We've had our breakfast, we've had our coffee, we've already fed because that's our routine. We come to work fed, ready to go. So we're energized, and you'll find people will naturally engage more in that morning time than they will after they've eaten food and it's the afternoon. So think about those times of day, and one of your assignments is, again, test them out, you guys. If morning doesn't work for your team and you guys are great after lunch, then make it stick. But test it out. Don't be afraid to test it out. Make sure that in your team meetings, one of the secrets that you follow to energize it is to give kudos and appreciation. When I say kudos and appreciation, we're all human beings. I've never met anybody that doesn't like to feel appreciated. So if we're with each other approximately 40 hours a week, some of us more than our own families, because half the time we're home, we're sleeping, then we are, in a way, with each other a lot. Give each other appreciation. Point those things out. Say thank you. Make it a public thing, because this is what helps energize and engage, because sometimes things go unnoticed. We've all been a part of that, where we've worked hard and no kudos or appreciation has been felt or shown. So use that meeting. You have everybody there, and it's the perfect opportune time, and it's a great way to energize that meeting. So I was in a practice actually quite a while ago, and they had what they called something like a talking stick. It wasn't a stick like you see in front of you, but it was designed. It had decorations on it. It was really, really cool. And one of the things I learned from the team is that was something that a team member or a core group in the team could actually grab onto and have the floor. And when you can participate together as a team, but also individually, but have a forum where you can speak up, where you realize if it's not your time to speak or your turn to speak, that whoever has that talking stick, if you will, that we not only recognize that, but respect those people and respect their time to speak. Because what we don't want to have is one person dominating the entire part of the meeting, because it doesn't encourage engagement. So if this is something that works for you, it's something that's fun. You guys can get together, you can design a stick, and it doesn't have to be a stick, it can be anything. But the purpose is to increase participation, to increase those to speak up, to respect each other's time, so that we can focus and have a great meeting. So
One thing, Aaron, I would interject here is, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but as a general rule, I'm going to call the doctors on the carpet here. If the meeting is 80% the doctor talking, you're running the meeting the wrong way. Let me say that again. If your typical team meeting is 80% of the time the doctor's talking, there is a problem, and there is a better way to run the meeting.
well said, Steve. So take that information and let's flip the tables. I'm sure you doctors, some of you might be even chuckling right now. I'm sure many of you wouldn't mind not speaking 80% of the time. So let's flip the tables. Let's do 80% of the time team unity and team participation, and 20% of the doctor. So looking at this next slide, think about engaging each other as a team by giving our reports, making each other accountable, giving assignments, and everybody doing their part. So a little bit later, I'm going to show an agenda. That's one of the resources that we're going to share with you. But within that agenda is the ability to share or report back to each other how we are doing as a team. Because sometimes the front office doesn't know what exactly is going on in the assistant doctor world or the hygiene world. And it's really nice to hear things that they have maybe tried or tweaked or implemented, or a new skill that they've tried. It's really nice to hear those things. So I recommend, and I know Steve recommends because we've been doing this for years, is in your team meetings, make assignments for departments. I like to call them core teams. Core teams would be assistants and doctors, since they work so well together and so much together, hygiene team, and then your administrators or front office team. So about three core teams in a practice where you guys together report to the team things that are working, things maybe that aren't working, things that we need to improve on. But it's going to be one of the things as an to open up the forum to help each other be more accountable. But it can't just be coming from the doctor. It's got to be coming from all the soldiers on the front line. And that's all of you because we're all there. Um, One of my favorite things, and I actually saved it for the last part of the secrets to energize your team, is a breakout session. I actually love it because you guys, it doesn't matter if it's a team of 4, a small dental team, or it's a team of 24. A breakout session will work for all of those teams because whether you're in a partner of 2 or in a core group of 5 each, 4 each, you can get together. You can plan on the assignment beforehand, give the assignment to each breakout session or each team where they have a slotted amount of time to be able to come together to either solve an issue, solve a problem, or be creative. What could we be doing differently here? What could we be trying, or what haven't we tried? Sometimes when you break up into groups and you all have the same assignment, when you come back, the 2, 3, 4 groups come back, you would be surprised at how much creativity comes from hearing what the other team members or what the other groups came up with. That's why I love it so much, because it works out so well. It's a great way to energize your team again. Like I said, it keeps it actively going. You got pens, you got paper, you go to different parts in the practice, and you're off and running. So build those into your 5 secrets to energizing your team. Build those into your agenda, if you will. This next one here is a little shout out. This is number 7 on our areas of discussion. Shout out to the TOPS team. I know many of you have met us, whether a Crown Council event or many of you have seen us in your own practices. So you got Steve right there at the upper left. And then to his right, to his left, you've got Pam Peterson, and then Mary Beth Brown, Chris Taconis, and then down on the bottom you have from your left, Tanya Bailey, and then that's me right there, Aaron Gannier in the middle, and then Shauna Lee Ackerman. So I've got a great team, and we go all over the country, and let me tell you, we've been in plenty of meetings ourselves, not just in your meetings, but the title speaks for itself. We talk about the same things over and over again, but nothing ever changes. Well, never again. And there's a story behind this, and us advisors, when we go into practices, this is one of those things that we value and we implement in every team. In fact, we're going to share it with you today, and so that you can implement it in your team. But there's a story behind it, and so Steve's going to share the story behind how we make this never happen again.
All right, so Aaron, this goes back. Many of you are familiar with the story I tell of my experience now 20 years ago with W. Edwards Deming, who was the American who is the father of the whole quality movement across the world, and that started in Japan right after World War II. But there is a process that comes from a Japanese word that the Japanese were coined the word or came up with it after he taught him the principle, and that is Kaizen. And Kaizen means continual, never-ending improvement. And so what you see on your screen is what we call the Kaizen action plan. And that is a plan that you fill out during every meeting, and you keep it updated as to the things that you've discussed, the action items you're going to take, and then who is responsible for that project. And it's one person, not a bunch of people, but one person is accountable for that area and what the target date is for completion. And then there's a status key down at the bottom. So that is at every meeting you keep that updated so that everybody knows what's been agreed on, who's responsible, and then you can follow, that person can give a report back at the next meeting on their progress and where they are with that particular project. So that that keeps the movement moving forward, so that you never say, well, we just keep talking about the same things over and over. There's key action steps identified. One person is accountable for each one, and they report back at the next meeting.
So I'm going to say it, Steve. I've been in many meetings myself, and you all know if you don't assign a person responsible, we know it doesn't get done. If we don't identify them and write it down, if we don't assign or identify a target date, why would we ever get it done? Because we talked about it, but yet there's no target date, so I have nothing to be accountable to. So what I'm trying to share with many of you is to shift the accountability to something that can help guide you, and that's what this is. It'll guide you to the target date. It'll guide you to who's responsible if you need to follow up with that person, and you have those actions. So let me tell you what this is not. It is not a laundry list. You do not want to make a laundry list of 50 items every time you come to one of your meetings. Use this for the key things that will help you get improvement within your teams. Okay? So there's one resource. Second resource, this is an example of a team agenda. I'm going to point out three main things on here. Right there towards the middle at the top, you see where it says results. What's happening? It's very vital that when we have a meeting that we talk about what's happening with the results of our practice. It's okay to talk about numbers or production or how well the doctor's doing or how great the hygiene team is doing, or maybe we need some areas of improvement in those. If we don't talk about our results, whether they're great or not so great, then they just don't get talked about. And that's not healthy within a business. The second part is planning. What are our goals moving forward? What's next? Whether it's the individual reports or the department reports, when using the talking stick at that time, but write some of those things down. And then you can have specific things to identify moving forward. Then the last part is the momentum. What are some things that we always need to be up on? What's our training? What's our systems? What's our protocol? What do we have to do within the scope of the business to stay where we need to be moving forward? And I'm not just talking about dentistry. There's lots of things that we need to discuss in meetings, whether it's OSHA or HIPAA meeting, or we got to have specific things so that we can improve our jobs just to run and operate as a business. Those are all things that you could put on your agenda. This is an example. Again, we can make it available to you guys so that you can use it for your meetings. Again, this can be for a weekly, a monthly, a quarterly. I like to keep it simple and use one master form, and then on that form we can choose what we want to talk about. But an agenda is vitally important. So how do we keep track of all these things? I know many of those teams out there that I've been, you know that I love to create systems and put them in binders. Why? Because those things are created together as a team with people's input, with team members' input, and the binder is a source that we can collect that information and then bring it with us to those meetings, or we can reference in the past. I don't recommend loose papers around or just put in a file. Use a binder that you bring with you. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Do not go to your meeting unless you have your team action plan binder. In this binder, you can have a tab for agendas, and you can have a tab for your Kaizen action plan, which is that action plan of responsibility and target dates. As it's there, you can always reference it throughout the week, but you always have it there, and you're continually filling it out and keeping track on those things. Last resource is you guys. You guys are a resource. Each of you. Think of yourself as, like I said earlier, a soldier on the front line. So many of you are familiar with what we call our culture guide. We've used this for many, many, many years. And it talks about 22 ideas or emotional expectations of our team to keep us engaged as a team and responsible and accountable to each other. And I'm going to read one of those things on there because it has a lot of application here. It's number 6 for those of you who have this. It's be solution minded. Okay? It doesn't take much to identify a problem and tell everybody about it. It takes a great team member to identify possible solutions and act on them. In our organization, we all agree that if you identify a problem, will identify 3 possible solutions, one of which does not cost any money. So right there, you guys are a resource. Come to the meetings with solutions. Don't just come to complain. Come with a solution. Very, very critical to keeping things going. Last one here in our areas of discussion is making the meetings equal increased production. This is one of my favorite ones. And I love this photo because each of us, you guys, has a part. If you don't think you do, I'm telling you right now, you have a part. Play the game together. We all have a piece to the puzzle. We all have a responsibility to engage in the team meeting and in team training. If you were the one that held the puzzle piece and you sat out, the puzzle wouldn't be complete. We need everybody's engagement. Again, it can't be 80% of the doctor holding 80% of the pieces. It's just not going to work. So be engaged to help increase production by actually doing it, which leads right into our last and final slide, which is what you see in front of you is, yes, that's a cockpit in the airplane. That's a simulator. So Steve has a story about the simulator that I want him to share with you, and then I'm going to briefly close with some remarks on how we can use this to increase our production and use that valuable meeting time to help us get return on investment. So Steve?
So if you've been to our TOPS Total Immersion course, you're familiar with the simulator, which is in flight travel, airline pilots are required to have X number of hours of simulator training every year. In other words, they have to go into the flight deck that's on the ground, and they are required to sit through different computer programs that run different flight situations, and then they got to respond to those. And the purpose of that is to practice taking care of different situations that you hope never happen in the air, but just in case they do, then you'll have at least practiced your response. So same thing with it. One of the purposes of a good team meeting is to have some simulator time where you practice your responses to different patient situations so that when you go live with patients, you've had some preparation work on how to deal with those. And so that becomes one of the really important agenda items for a good team meeting. So Aaron, let's go to a couple of questions here from what we've talked about. First question is it okay to mix a motivational meeting with a business meeting? And maybe I can just add my thought here is absolutely it's okay. And in fact, some of the best meetings are those where you have different things that you cover, including you might have periodically one of the Crown Council powerful team meetings as part of your team meeting. Those resources, the powerful team meetings, are usually video topics that last anywhere from 7 to 12 minutes. They have a list of discussion items, sometimes a worksheet, and their purpose is to get everybody focused on what really matters in the practice. So certainly okay to have something like that along with the actual checklist items, your action plan, and updating that, and other things that need to be discussed. So absolutely. A related question is, and it says, our meetings are so boring. What can we do to make them not boring? Aaron, you want to address that?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that question because throughout this slideshow, this webinar, I hope that you've taken some of these things and will interject them into those meetings. And if you're asking this question, and let's just say, because I know for some of you, the doctor is actually not sitting here right now listening to this, make these points, take them back to him, take an agenda, and say, hey, we want to interject into our team meetings these ideas, group participation or group breakout sessions or the talking stick or areas of reports. Take those back to the doctor or to the team members who aren't listening to this and make them a part of your agenda. But there it is. Make it a part of your agenda so that it's written out and people can see it. Make assignments so that your meeting is not boring. When you have assignments and people have to interject, it decreases that level of, oh my gosh, this is boring, and what Steve said, it's not a good idea to have the doctor speaking 80% of the time.
Next question is, how do you handle phones during an early morning meeting? If it's during our regular business hours, do you send it to message or leave someone to answer the phone and not involve them in the meeting? I would say to this that in most practice situations, that if you're doing the meeting right and you get the good return because you've planned well, that everybody needs to be on board, that you leave a message on your message system, your voicemail, that says, we're in a team meeting. We will return your call at 2 o'clock, so that they know that somebody will get right back to them. But that's my preference for most offices.
Agreed.
The larger the office, it might be a little bit different, but that would be the typical recommendation. Next question. We have regular meetings scheduled, but the doctor is, quote, in charge. They tend to get canceled. How would you suggest that we allow someone? Would you suggest that we allow someone else to plan and be responsible for make the meetings happen regularly? So, I think this goes back to what's the purpose of the meeting, and what are we really trying to accomplish? So, when we find meetings being canceled frequently, it's because there's not value that's seen in the meeting, and typically the reason it gets canceled is because we've scheduled a patient during that time. And so it really goes back to this whole philosophy of, if you're planning properly and you believe in the 3-to-1 return concept, that every hour spent in a team meeting, to a point obviously, but every hour will return the equivalent of 3 hours worth of production, then you'll be eager to do the meeting. So the question here is, how could we suggest that he allows someone else to plan and be responsible? So I would say first is have the doctor watch this webinar and then have a discussion about what is the real purpose of the meeting and how can we make them so effective that we won't want to miss it every week because it adds that much value to the practice.
Right. So
Uh,
let me add one more thing to that, Steve.
you
When
got
you
it.
sit down with him after he's watched it, show him and create the first few meeting agendas with him. Involve him so he can see what we're sending you, or what you're going to be getting is an agenda to follow. For many doctors, if they can see something that's value and areas of discussion and assignments, they're much more likely to make it happen.
Excellent. Next question is it a good idea to show appreciation on an individual level? Some of our team members are uncomfortable with being called out. So let me give you an example of this that I think is just a model. I was in Springfield, Missouri a couple weeks ago with Parkcrest Dental. They're just an amazing practice that we've worked with for some time now. And this is a practice that's going on 30 years, and it really is just an amazing place. But in their team meeting, for example, one of the things that they do is they have the Lifesaver Award. And the Lifesaver Award is given to somebody on the team who saved the day. In other words, somebody who went out of their way to make sure that something worked so that a patient got served or helped another team member or something like that. And it really is one of the best things that they do in their team meetings. So done appropriately like that, where it's kind of an official thing that you do every time. Uh, I haven't seen a team member yet. Maybe there is one out there somewhere who didn't appreciate being appreciated. It's one of the #1 things that people work for. So you might want to formalize it up a little bit so that everybody understands kind of what the criteria is. Next question is, can I have a copy of the Kaizen action plan? Absolutely. All the resources that we've talked about today will be posted on the Crown Council website at crowncouncil.org in the webinar section. So you go to crowncouncil.org, go to the training tab, go under webinars, and the webinar will be posted within the next couple of hours along with the resources that we've talked about today. So Kaizen Action Plan will be one of those, as well as the other resources Aaron's talked about today. Aaron, here's the next question. What is the DTB analysis on the agenda?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a form that we use. That agenda is what we use in practices across the country. But the DTB analysis is what we call the daily target board. Some of you who have been to a total immersion have heard Steve talk about how teams, the most successful teams, keep track and score of how they're doing. I mean, you wouldn't go to a basketball game, an NBA game with no jumbotron with the score on up at the top in the middle. If we weren't keeping score, what would be the purpose of the game? And so you got to have a purpose in the practice and know the score. And so the DTB analysis is how we track our daily targets and goals so that we can analyze how to be more effective instead of waiting on a monthly basis and looking at our numbers at the end of every month, because at the end of every month there's not much you can do. But if you're doing it on a daily basis, you can identify maybe something mid-month or the first week and say, hey, here's an opportunity. What can we do to be better to increase this so we have a better results by the end of the month? So that's something that we work with teams across the country with.
All right, so with that, Aaron, I'd say as a final action item here moving forward is to have a discussion as a team about how effective our team meetings really are, what specifically we can do to make them more productive, and really buy into this whole concept, the 3-to-1 concept. For every hour spent should yield 3 hours of productivity, and then really go to work on making these productive with a purpose and a plan instead of just meeting. So with that, I think I got one more question coming up here. Last question for you, Aaron. It says, in our current meetings, the morale of our overall team members is low. There are some team members that are very negative to all topics. How can we change that? I'll just weigh in on this, and Aaron, you can wrap up with any comments. Is if there is negative behavior in a group setting, that merits an individual discussion with the team member about that specific behavior. So that probably is a symptom of some other stuff going on, but an individual discussion there would be in order. Aaron?
Yes, we all agree when we were hired that we were pleading our case of, yes, I'm a great team member. Yes, I'm willing to do whatever I need to. So if somebody has fallen into that trap of negativity, again, that private discussion with them is great. And then I take it one step further and get a commitment from them that when they come to the meeting, that they will be positive. And if they are not positive and continue to come with negative feelings and attitude, then we go to that point and maybe that's the time to make a change.
We're going to have a different discussion.
Different discussion, yes.
Excellent. Aaron, thanks for sharing with us today, and thanks everybody for being with us for our webinar. I hope you picked up some things that will help increase the effectiveness of your team meetings. And Aaron, why don't you go to your last slide? Most of you know that one of the best team experiences that we host at the Total Patient Service Institute is our Total Immersion Experience. And with dates coming up in Chicago, Kansas City, and Las Vegas for the rest of the year. And one of the things that most of the Crown Council offices have in common is they have this experience in common. So if your team or a team member has not experienced the Total Immersion course, sooner rather than later would be in order. We'd love to have them so that they have the grounding in the core principles that really make Crown Council offices work. So with that, thanks for being with us today for our webinar. We hope you have a great week, and thanks for participating with us today.